Nice to see so many faces. Welcome. We'll get started with the singing of our national anthem. Will deliver the invocation.
Y'all please bow your heads with me. Blessed are you, Lord, God of creation. You feed us the whole world with your goodness, your grace, and your kindness, and your mercy. You nourish us and sustain us to do good to all. Now bless this food to our use and us to your Rotary service. Amen.
Amen. You may be seated. I will now call forward Joe Jones. Joe has done a terrific job this month of welcoming everyone, and he's here today to welcome our visitors.
It's always good to be reminded of the Rotary 4-way test, and I will do that today. What about the things that we think, say, and do? And Rotary premise number 3 especially applies. Will it build goodwill and better friendships? And to that end, would you stand now and greet the person at the table next to you or at your table that you haven't met before? Okay, if you'll take your seats, we'll begin a little bit further about the program of introducing our guests. We have no visiting Rotarians today, but I think we may have some guests that are guests of our members. If you are a member and have a guest, would you stand, please? And Bishop, would you please take the mic around? Yes, we do. We've got 2 or 3.
I'm Carrie Powers, and I have with me today Charlie Nutt, owner and publisher of Free Times, and he'll be a member soon. And I also have Darren Gowd, and he's an Allstate agent in the Vista.
Charlie and Darren, welcome.
My name is Wes Hickman. I'm going to introduce a guest of Matt Stone, Miss Amy Stone, a former member of the club and the Secretary of the University of South Carolina Board of Trustees.
Amy, it's good to see you back. You need to sit down.
I'm Libby Gober, and I'm delighted to have as my guest today Sandra Owensby. Sandra is the Executive Director of the Lurie Center, formerly the Capitol Senior Center, and hopefully she will be a member soon also. And Amy needs no introduction.
Sandra, welcome.
I'm Jerry Bright. I have with me today a friend of 67 years, Gerald Smith.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm JJ Hammond, and with me today I have, if you guys listen to Sports Talk Radio, as the mortgage guru, also known as Jacob Crowder with First Community Bank.
I'm Bob Crutchfield, and my guest is Mark Lett. Mark is a former member of this club. He joined back in 1998. And he also, I'm not going to tell you whether he's about to become a member or not, because we're not supposed to tell you that. But anyway, Mark is, and his wife just got back from a vacation in Detroit, and I just told him he's the second person I've ever met that vacationed in Detroit. But anyway, it's Mark Lett.
Anybody else? Well, we welcome all of you, and we hope you will come back and be with us again. Oh, sorry.
I don't need the mic, I just wanted everyone to know that this is probably Sonny's last day with us, not that he's going away on the other side. We moved to Greensboro, and they're packing the truck up this week, and I just thought we'd like to give our old brother a
Sonny, we will miss you. You have done a tremendous job with vocational tech in our state and in the Midlands, and we hope that we will see you again one day. Thank you.
I've enjoyed my almost 10 years here in Columbia. Thank you so much, and really have enjoyed being a part of Rotary. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Joe. Best wishes on your transition, Sonny, back to Greensboro. I'll call forward Rusty to pass. Rusty's got double duty. He's playing the piano and he's got Help and Happiness.
Tom, you stole some of my thunder. I had that down, and it sort of reminded me, the way you told that, it sort of reminded me of the story Mark Lett's probably heard about the family in Minneapolis that moved across the river to St. Paul, and their little daughter was saying her prayers one night, and she said, "Goodbye, God, we're moving to St. Paul." So anyway, it was reported in the newspaper. That was back when the newspapers were small enough to report things like that, and the editor thought it was humorous, and so he put it in the newspaper. The St. Paul newspaper editor had a column the next day that said the punctuation was wrong. What the little girl had actually said was, "Good. By God, we're moving to St. Paul." Anyways, I want y'all to know that Sonny is a Rock Hill boy, done good, and we're proud of you, Sonny. Other health and happiness news. Hal Stevenson is the new president of the Vista Guild, and as such is Meredith Gammon's boss. Walt Carton, who I don't think is here today, but Walt has been made a partner at the Parker Poe Law Firm. He doesn't have any place to live, but he does have a nice job. He's a partner at Parker Poe. Also, I'd like for you to know, we've been working on this for a while, and I think it's come together enough to say this, that on the 15th of February, 2 weeks from today, we will have a presidential candidate as our speaker. Now, we don't know exactly which one yet, but we've lined up about 3, so one of them is gonna be here, I feel sure. So you want to put that on your calendar and be sure you invite a number of guests. I've reached out to several members of the club that we don't see much anymore, and wanted to report to you on them. Bill Rogers sounded good, said he was doing reasonably well, gets out occasionally, but not when it's cold. And Murray Price will be 95 years old on February the 24th. His hearing has deteriorated somewhat since I talked to him last, but through his daughter, I was able to finally communicate with him who I was, and so he got back on the phone. I don't know if he turned his hearing aid off or what, but anyway, he got back on the phone, sounded great, said still works in his yard, and is doing very nicely. Mick Lurie, I talked to this morning. Mick was real enthusiastic about Rotary and about talking to me and so forth, but I could tell that he is declining, and it was hard for him to keep his mind on the subject. But and probably the most fun call that I made was to John Folsom, who is the only member of this club that I've never been able to call by his first name. I just can't do it. Mr. Folsom was 97 years old on December the 30th, and he's had a hard few months, which I was unaware of. He has fallen several times, broke his arm, broke his nose, spent 4 months in rehab. But he said his goal is to get back to Rotary. And so if you think about it, you might drop a note to any or all of these guys and encourage them to come back sometime. I want to share a couple of little, hopefully humorous things with you as I approach my annual Lent, the month of February, where I don't have anything alcoholic to drink. It reminds me of the woman who was 101 years old, was being interviewed by a reporter, probably at the state newspaper. And the reporter said, can you give us some health tips on reaching the age of 101? She said, well, yeah. She said, for better digestion, I drink beer. In case of appetite loss, I drink white wine. For low blood pressure, I drink red wine. In case of high blood pressure, I drink scotch. And when I have a cold, I drink schnapps. So the reporter said, well, when do you drink water? She said, I've never been that sick. Is Skip Holbrook here today? I thought this was some brilliant police work. That two policemen called the station on the radio. Hello, is that Sarge? Yes. He said, we have a case here. A woman shot her husband for stepping on the floor. She had just mopped clean. And so the sergeant says, well, have you arrested the woman? They said, no, sir, the floor is still wet. We've all been there. We've all been there in a room full of pregnant women with their husbands. Instructor says, ladies, remember that exercise is good for you. Walking is especially beneficial. It strengthens the pelvic muscles and will make delivery that much easier. Just pace yourself. Make plenty of stops and try to stay on a soft surface like grass or a path. Now, gentlemen, you remember, you're in this together. It wouldn't hurt for you to go walking with her. In fact, that shared experience would be good for you both. The room suddenly became very quiet as the men absorbed this information. After a few moments, a man whom I understood could have been David Clark or Bob Crutchfield, but I don't know that for certain. After a few moments, a man at the back of the room slowly raised his hand. Yes, said the instructor. I was just wondering if it would be all right if she carries a golf bag. Brings a tear to your eye, doesn't it? That level of sensitivity cannot be learned. And last but not least, some of you I know have adopted children, and it can be a very long, drawn-out, and painful process. There was a couple who worked at the circus who was trying to adopt a child, went to an adoption agency, and the social workers were very doubtful and about their suitability to adopt. The couple produced photos of their 50-foot motorhome, which was equipped with a beautiful nursery. The social workers then doubted about the education the child would get. We've arranged for a full-time tutor, they said, who will teach the child all the usual subjects, along with French, Mandarin, and computer skills. Well, then there are doubts about raising the child in a circus atmosphere. Our nanny is an expert in pediatric welfare and diet. Well, the social workers were finally satisfied, so they asked, well, what age child are you hoping to adopt? It doesn't really matter, they said, as long as he fits in the canon. Have a nice week.
Thank you, Rusty. That's great. A lot of fun. I want to call forward Bob Crutchfield, and as Bob is on his way, he has an announcement for us. As he's on his way, I'll remind someone from each table would grab the cart bucket and pass it around, and let's contribute to cart this week. Here's Bob Crutchfield.
Thank you. I feel like a pitch man. Remember a couple weeks ago I talked to you about the book that was put out in the state newspaper under Mark Lett, and it's probably one of the better things that I've seen that talks about the heroes of South Carolina back during the flood, or whether it's basketball games or the other type things. It's a wonderful thing for you to have. It's a wonderful thing to give to a child or grandchild. Now let me tell you something that's changed since I got here. These are $5, and if you'd like to donate $5 to get one, that's fine. But you don't have to donate $5. An executive decision was just made by Mark at my table. So whether you pay or not, you're certainly welcome to take one home. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. So grab a book on your way out. I have a couple of quick announcements, and then we'll get...
Nobody back to those who didn't already pay.
Yeah, you already sold some books, didn't you?
Yeah.
See Bob Crutchfield about that if you have a question. What I wanted to share with you all today is we have, just want to remind everyone, we have a credit card reader. We have the ability to pay credit cards, so if you don't bring cash or a check to a meeting and you want to, you pay at the door for lunch, you can go ahead and have Debbie swipe your credit card. I'd just like to make that reminder from time to time, and would also let you know if you have dues that are outstanding or bills that you need to pay. Debbie can take your credit card for those payments as well. And so just wanted to throw that out there after some discussion with the board last week. That was something I felt like needed to be shared with you all, to remind you all that you can take credit cards here at Columbia Rotary. It's something new in the last couple of months. So now, one other quick reminder, February 29th is going to be a fun, great luncheon meeting at the USC Alumni Center. So we went there over the Christmas time to have a party. We're now going to take a trip there to check out lunch at the facility at the USC Alumni Center. It's in the Vista. There'll be a lot more information to come on in terms of details about where to park and make sure everybody is clear on the plan. But I'll tell you that Harris Pastides, USC president, will be our speaker that day. So lots to look forward to on February 29th. And with that, I'll invite Reese Williams to come to the podium to introduce our program.
Thank you, Mr. President. You and I have a common bond. That common bond is our commitment to the Rotary ideal of service above self. Our speaker today, William Hubbard, personifies that ideal. William is past president of the American Bar Association. It's one of the largest professional associations in the world, 400,000 members. It's a great national honor that William has brought to our small state. But it is William's reputation here at home, and I think all of you will appreciate what I'm about to say. It's the reputation that he has among those who know him best that matters the most. Of dozens of examples that I could give you of William's recognitions and accomplishments, both nationally as well as here in South Carolina. I'm just going to mention two because they're things that I'm personally aware of, having known William over the years. First, William received our local bar's Distinguished Service Award in 2008. That's the highest honor that our bar gives, and it's a remarkable recognition. I can assure you that you would know of everybody who's ever gotten that award. It's quite rare, and it recognizes service to our community as well as to the legal profession. The second is that William is now a member of the USC Board of Trustees. And at one time, he was the chairman for several years. You might remember, and I think it's probably still true, that the Board of Trustees is made up of some people with pretty big egos. And sometimes they disagree, and it's hard to maintain any kind of degree of control over them. They do things that might even be embarrassing at times. So when William was chairman, there was none of that. Every time there was an announcement made about some action by the Board of Trustees, it was one of unanimity, harmony, good news, we're so happy about this. And so I couldn't quite understand how that was happening, and I asked William about it. Since he was chairman, I assumed that he had some responsibility for that. And he said it was just very simple, that it was a result of education. And by that, what he meant was that he had educated everybody on the board about an issue before it ever came up for review and approval. In other words, it was a product of his skill as a mediator. William is a member of the firm of Nelson Mullins here in Columbia. He and his wife, Cappy, who is a true partner, she stood by him all these years, have 3 children and 1 grandchild. William is also the brother-in-law of Making It Grow's Amanda McNulty. Service above self. Welcome, William Hubbard.
Reese, thank you. Can you hear me okay? Reese knows how to polish up an old boot about as well as anybody I know. Thank you for that kind introduction, Reese. I appreciate it. The American Bar Association is an interesting organization. You talk about herding cats, well, maybe the ABA redefines that whole concept. It does have 400,000 members, 3,500 different sections and committees and commissions within that umbrella organization. And during the year you're president, you are, under the bylaws, you are the CEO of the organization. We have a permanent COO who's a retired 3-star Air Force general who does a remarkable job. But at the end of the day, for that year, you have to make the final decisions. We have 900 employees, about 600 in Chicago, where most of the administrative offices are, and then 300 in Washington, where their advocacy efforts are and media relations and all of those functions reside. For those of you who don't know, it's not just about continuing education for lawyers and trying to help lawyers be better lawyers and judges be better judges. There's several functions of the ABA that you might not know about. One is, by assignment and agreement with the United States Department of Education, the American Bar Association is the accrediting body for all of the law schools in the United States. And for those of you who think that there are too many lawyers and we ought to close down law schools, I have to tell you, as long as the schools meet certain standards, you're required to accredit them because of antitrust implications. So it's not just a question of deciding that there are too many lawyers, let's close half the law schools. It's a little more complicated than that. Another function we've had since the Eisenhower administration is we provide a peer review and assessment of those individuals nominated for the federal bench. We would be so lucky if they were all as good as Judge Joe Anderson, but there has to be a screening process in advance, and both the White House and the Senate Judiciary Committee rely on the American Bar Association's assessment in determining whether a candidate is well qualified, or not qualified. And often if the ABA says a candidate is not qualified by reason of temperament, or background or experience, they don't get nominated. So it's a good filtering system. And also we house the Center for the Study for Professional Responsibility. So the ABA sets the model guidelines that the states then use almost usually verbatim, but with some changes in setting the rules that guide lawyers' conduct. There are a number of issues we focused on in the year that I was fortunate to be president, and one of them is an issue that's front and center in South Carolina, and that's the issue of domestic violence. In our country, a woman over her lifetime, 1 out of 3 women will be a victim of domestic violence in her life, and 15.5 million children every year witness acts of domestic violence in our country, and you can imagine psychological scarring and other ill effects that has on their development. We've been lucky in South Carolina. We've had, with Henry McMaster, I understand he might be speaking next week or soon thereafter. He did a remarkable job when he was Attorney General in trying to prosecute more perpetrators of domestic violence, and also started a program to train lawyers to represent victims of domestic violence. And my law firm has been very active in trying to assist those victims. And Alan Wilson has done the same thing as Attorney General. He's done a terrific job of trying to address this scourge. Immigration, when I first came into office about 18 months ago, there was a surge of unaccompanied children coming across the border, primarily from Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. And what was creating that surge was basically the government in those countries had broken down and the gangs had taken over. And so many of these children were trying to escape, particularly the girls, were being abducted and taken to be put into sex slavery situations. They were being used for human trafficking purposes. And so the mothers, primarily these girls, were sending them across the border through Mexico and up the border, coming into the United States, where they would then turn themselves in to the Border Patrol seeking safety and security. Now this surge of children, most of them 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, was causing a real issue in our country, and we weren't really well equipped to handle this surge, and the government set up a temporary holding facility at Lackland Air Force Base. Baptist churches and Catholic churches and other faith-based communities set up temporary housing for these children. But then the question became, what do you do now? I mean, there has to be a hearing, there has to be some determination about whether or not these children meet the standard, whether they were fearful of their life or safety, and you have to prove that in order not to be deported. And the immigration judges were overwhelmed. They were basically being asked to find out the facts and then make the determination. So they needed lawyers to come in, and so thousands of lawyers volunteered. We put in place a program to train lawyers in the basics of immigration law so they could represent the children. As it turned out, in cases where these children have assistance of counsel, in 73% of the cases, they're not deported because they have valid reasons under existing law, which has been the law in our country for 70 or 80 years, to stay in the country, at least temporarily. If they didn't have a lawyer, they were only avoiding deportation in only 15% of the cases. So it did make a difference in terms of trying to get the facts before an immigration judge so that judge can make a proper decision. Criminal justice reform, sentencing reform is a big issue in our country. It's rare that you have Cory Booker and Rand Paul, the Heritage Foundation, and the ACLU agreeing on an issue, but they all agree that we have to do something about the mandatory minimum sentences and some of the unfairnesses in our sentencing process. I'm proud to say, and whenever I went around the world, around the country, talking about criminal justice issues, I was proud to say South Carolina had led the way. In 2010, South Carolina passed a sentencing reform bill, a bipartisan effort of Democrats and Republicans, that has led to a 24% decrease in the number of admissions to the prison system in South Carolina. It's essentially flipped the percentage of violent and nonviolent criminals. Now, 2/3 of the incarcerated persons in South Carolina are violent, the people we want in jail, and only about 1/3 are nonviolent. So we're able to put more attention and more resources into trying to really get the bad guys and not spending resources on people who simply have drug addictions or other problems that could benefit from different kinds of programs and relief. This program in South Carolina is saving $5 million a year in direct costs to the taxpayers of this state, and it's saving, estimates are $100 million in avoided capital costs in the building of new prisons. Now you think, are we safer or not safer? Well, actually the recidivism rate has gone down. So we're just being smarter about sentencing, and we've done a good job in South Carolina. We're really a model for the country and how this can work. There's another issue involving the criminal justice system that I want to mention. It's called the collateral consequences of conviction. The American Bar Association cataloged 46,000 laws across our country that inhibit the successful reentry of a person who's been incarcerated once that person has served a sentence and comes back out of prison. 62% of those laws inhibit someone from getting a license. There was actually a job training program in prison in one state where they were training incarcerated persons to be electricians and plumbers, only to find out there was a law that said if you had been in jail for a felony, you could never be licensed as an electrician or a prisoner. So, you know, if these folks cannot get employment once they get out of prison, then the chances are they're going to go back into crime and continue to be a threat to society. So in South Carolina, we have about 800 of those laws, and some of them make perfect sense. There are laws that prohibit people who have been involved with evil acts around children, should never be allowed to be around children in any kind of employment situation. Those make sense, and we need those kind of laws, but there are a lot of them that are just added punishment that really prohibit the successful reentry into society. I was asked to talk about what can we do about criminal justice and crime in our country. It depends on how long you want to make an investment, how long you want to see, how long it takes to see the investment pay off. But there's enormous research and incredible research out of the University of Chicago, a conservative university. The economics department under the leadership of Dr. James Heckman has done longitudinal studies that basically show high quality early childhood education and intervention. It probably gets more return on investment than any other tax dollar you can spend in terms of lowering crime rates, reducing dependency on government, and reducing incarceration, and increasing employability. So I don't have time in this speech today to go into that research, but if you're interested, just Google James Heckman and look at some of his research. It takes time, it takes a commitment over generations to get the payoff, but if we started now, we could make a difference. Civil justice there's a gap in access to civil justice in our country, and most people think that because there seem to be so many lawyers that people's legal needs are being met, but they're actually not being met. And it's interesting, though, that the preamble to the Constitution, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice. They recognize, the founders of our country recognize that you had to have justice as the foundation of a country or the country wouldn't survive. But what we have in our nation today is a lack of access to justice, particularly among the poor, and those more and more persons of moderate means don't have access to our civil justice system. Let me give you a couple of statistics. 80% of the litigants in the family courts in our country do not have a lawyer. And there are multiple reasons why. They either can't afford a lawyer, they don't know how to get to a lawyer, or they don't want a lawyer. But in civil cases generally, in 50% of the civil cases in our country, one side or the other is not represented by counsel. And in landlord-tenant cases, only about 10% of the tenants have a lawyer when they go into landlord-tenant courts. The World Justice Project ranks 102 countries on access and affordability to civil justice, and we rank 66 out of 102 countries. So we need to reform our justice system. We need to make it more accessible, less complicated, simplify the rules, and make sure that we look at alternative ways to provide justice to people. A lot of states are doing that through people at the courthouse called court navigators, or using kiosks or online services to help people get the legal attention that they need. There's also, because of this gap in the justice system, smart people, investors, venture capitalists have decided there's a market. There's a market that's not being met, and we're going to get into that market. So venture capitalists in 2012 invested $66 million in technology companies that provide legal services. These are not law firms, they're online services that provide legal services. That number jumped to $456 million in 2013 and went over $1 billion in 2014. And I don't have the numbers on 2015, but it wouldn't surprise me if that number didn't double. Because they see a latent market and people want to gravitate to easier, more accessible ways to get their problems solved. I mean, we've seen it already in journalism, we've seen it in banking, we've seen it in the way we shop online. I mean, the world is shifting fundamentally, and people want that immediate response. And so the question becomes, what do we do about regulation? I mean, we have these very elaborate rules regulating the conduct of lawyers to make sure there's no conflicts of interest and other things. But these online services are essentially unregulated. Many of them are serving a very good need and meeting the needs of people where they want their needs met. But at this point, what the legal profession is grappling with is there appropriate regulation for these services. Let me give an example of how popular they are. There's a company called Avo. It was founded by the folks that it started, or at least were founders of eBay and PayPal. They resolve 60 million disputes a year online using an algorithm-based method. Avo is another company. It gets 8 million hits a year on people seeking legal services online. And IBM has invested millions and billions of dollars in its Watson project, the artificial intelligence project. They have a subset of that is called Ross the Intelligent Lawyer, which is a computer, again using artificial intelligence to solve people's legal needs. Right now, they're estimated there are over 1,000 technology companies in the market providing legal services to people online and through other methods. I want to talk briefly about some of the efforts around the world that the ABA has been involved in. Rule of law is essential. It's a bedrock for any community of opportunity. And in order to maintain any system of order and liberty, you have to have the rule of law. You have to have transparency. The people have the right to participate. You cannot have corruption in your government and your justice systems. You have to adequately fund your justice system if you're going to have stability in a country. One thing, we all tend to laugh about our justice system and say it's not effective and it takes too long and it costs too much. But in fact, our justice system is the envy of the world. It absolutely is. We have judges who sacrifice income, substantial amount of income to serve the public. And it's the rare exception when we have a judge who's found out to have taken a bribe or be corrupt. Unfortunately, in many parts of the world, that's the rule. The expectation is you go in and you bribe the judge if you want to get something done. You can see the ill effects that has on commerce and the ability of people to rely on contracts and their affairs in order to have a business and to keep the economy growing. The American Bar Association receives about $46 million a year in grants from the U.S. State Department and the Rule of Law and USAID to go into countries where rule of law is weak and try to bring programs to people in those countries to help solidify them and make sure that they're following some rudimentary form of rule of law. As part of my job over the last year, I went to 4 countries to do inspections of these programs that we have in different countries, and I want to speak just briefly about those 4 experiences. The first was China. Now, China right now seems to be ruling and running the stock market in the U.S. and around the world. It's the 800-pound gorilla, there's no doubt about it. I was supposed to speak on a program following President Jimmy Carter. We went down to the green room. I was handed a note saying, by the way, you're supposed to speak today, but you will not say anything critical of the government. Well, that was sort of chilling. And then there's a stack of books and they're photographers and there's no Jimmy Carter. And I went, well, I'm supposed to follow, former president of the United States, and where is he? And they went, well, his permission to speak has been withdrawn. And I said, why? They said, well, because earlier this week he said something about human rights. And so, you know, here's a former president of our country who helped open the door to China. He built on some of the work that President Nixon engaged in, and yet he was not permitted to speak in China. It put me on the horns of a dilemma. Now, what am I supposed to do? Get up there and talk about trade between U.S. and China, which was the topic of the conference. But I was lucky that morning I read in the Chinese newspaper, which was translated in English, fortunately, that the Communist Party plenary session the following month was going to be on rule of law. And so I was able to stand up and say I was so pleased that the Communist Party was going to have a session on rule of law. Now let's talk about what the rule of law means. Let's talk about rule of law and not rule by law. And I didn't get a lot of applause. I went through the 4 universal principles, and you know, when I got through, I went back to where I was seated. And of course, the people that were seated around me had left. You know, and I saw where they made a couple of notes and then hightailed it out the back door. And I had these visions of being on the plane, leaving the country, and being yanked off the plane. But it didn't happen. I did order a drink when I reached 10,000. But China's an interesting place. Right now, there's a big problem. Not anyone, but people who are strongly talking about their human rights record, lawyers and religious figures are being arrested. Basically, religion as we know it is illegal in China. I mean, there's some state-sanctioned churches, but the Communist Party picks the ministers for those churches. And I was able to go out in some neighborhoods and talk to some people who were actually Christians, and they're basically underground. That's the only way they can survive. The deity there, the church is the Communist Party. It still runs China. Interestingly, at one of the meetings of our Board of Governors of the American Bar Association, we had a presentation by a very high-ranking official of the U.S. State Department who's in charge of international crime. And he said that, you know, in our generation, we're fighting enemy forces and groups in the Middle East. That's our focus as a nation today. He said that our children and our children's children, their number one enemy and the entity they'll have to be most concerned about is China. And we see that already. There's so much evidence of the hacking into our military computers and our intelligence and the theft of corporate secrets and that sort of thing. It's well documented. It's been on 60 Minutes and the New York Times, Wall Street Journal. It's pretty well documented, but it's an amazing place. I mean, but anyway, that's enough about China. Serbia, that's a place that I was able to spend some time there. It's a fledgling country. The former Yugoslavia was broken up into 17 nations, and they're all, you know, potentially could backslide back into oppressive states. And so going over and trying to help their bar associations talk about rule of law is something that's greatly appreciated. Another interesting place that I went and somewhat challenging is Saudi Arabia. As you can see there, the United States has a difficult relationship, but the people in the State Department will tell you that they're our most important ally in the Middle East. And it was just reported last weekend where I saw that they were actually funding, the U.S. and the Saudis had joined together in some funding of efforts to, they were providing the money for forces to fight ISIS. But long story short, it's still a very difficult place, particularly for women. One of the tasks that we went over there to try to talk to them about was that you should take advantage of this talent pool that you have. I mean, women actually make good lawyers and they make good judges. Right now there are 50 women who practice law in Saudi Arabia, and after we left they said, well, we're going to increase that next year to 100. Well, you know, you just take a little progress a little bit at a time. We were also, they had agreed, and I don't know if Judge Anderson's still here, but working through the Federal Judicial Center, 25 Saudi judges they agreed to send over here to be trained at our Federal Judicial Center, and we were going to do some swapping of judges to try to ingrain law as we know it in their judicial system. Right now they rely so heavily on Sharia law, and to the extent they can move toward more commonly accepted principles of international law, it's good for everybody. Lebanon is another place. I was there before the government completely broke down and there was no garbage collection on the streets, but it's one of those places in the Middle East that's deeply troubled. The challenge there is that they have a population of 4 million people in Lebanon, but they have a million refugees have come into their country since the Syrian crisis. And so they're trying to cope with a million refugees on a population of 4 million, and trying to document the people and feed people and keep people in areas where you know who they are is almost an impossible task. And on top of that, you have a government structure there that's a tripartite government. Its government responsibility is shared by a Shia, a Sunni, and a Maronite Catholic. And so there's still a tradition of Catholicism in Lebanon, and it's part of the government structure. But they have great challenges. But it was an interesting year. I was proud to represent the state of South Carolina. Always proud of South Carolina, and I got a little something I'm going to show you in a minute. But as a prelude, I was lucky in that it was the 800th anniversary of Magna Carta. And Magna Carta is the foundation for so much of what we know and appreciate as our constitutional rights in the United States. I mean, the overarching principle of Magna Carta is that no person, no king, no president, no sovereign is above the law. Everybody is subject to the law. And that was, Magna Carta was the first time that became clearly articulated in the negotiation between the barons and King John. South Carolina, when it was a colony, adopted English common law as the first state to do so. By doing that, it adopted Magna Carta. So Magna Carta is the law of the state of South Carolina. And as the other colonies adopted Magna Carta into their state constitutions and their government frameworks, it became the foundation for the United States Constitution. The ideas of due process of law and trial by jury and other rights became part of the U.S. Constitution, but they find their foundation in Magna Carta. So it was a grand celebration, and so a lot of work went into joint efforts between the U.S. and the English, the British government and lawyers over there. And I was fortunate to make multiple trips over to help plan those activities. But on the 800th anniversary celebration itself, which was at Runnymede, where the barons actually got the king to seal Magna Carta, the Archbishop of Canterbury was there, the top judicial officials of the UK were there. The Prime Minister Cameron was there, and I had a wonderful occasion to speak to him sort of about off stage and behind the scenes a bit. And it's interesting, the conversation with him was about how they were trying to get the World Cup, Soccer World Cup in London, and how he could tell the people weren't really responding very well to him. Of course, we all know about the FIFA corruption now that's come out and the bribes that were alleged to have been made to get the World Cup in certain locations. But he said he also knew it really wasn't working well when this head of FIFA, who some have noted in his pictures is a little overweight, stood up, and he'd been sitting in a Queen Anne chair, and when he stood up, the chair came with him. So the Prime Minister said, "I don't think we're going to get the World Cup." Sure enough, they didn't. But Queen Elizabeth was there, Prince Charles, Prince William. It was really, my job was to make sure that Princess Anne got where she was supposed to be at certain times. And it was all carefully orchestrated, coordination with Buckingham Palace, making sure what I said was she knew in advance, and actually they asked me to write out what I would have her say. And so I'd never more carefully proofed something in my life until I sent some paragraphs over that she might want to say. But she helped us rededicate a memorial to Magna Carta that was constructed in 1957 by Americans. 9,000 American lawyers contributed to the cost of this monument, which was and still is, until this year, the only monument to Magna Carta in the United Kingdom. And so there's a very close relationship between our countries. We certainly derive so much of the principles in our justice system from England, but to be able to go over and celebrate the 800th anniversary was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. And then I was leaving. I said, well, I've given the speech. I've gotten Princess Anne where she needed to be despite a breakdown in crowd control. And I'm going back to the hotel. I said, no, you've got to do an interview on BBC News in about 30 minutes. So I have a video clip of that, which I think may give you a sense of the scene that day on the 800th anniversary. And it's also a recording of the interview that I had with BBC on June 15, 2015, on the 800th anniversary of Magna Carta. And after that's over, I've concluded my remarks, but I'll be happy to stick around and comment or answer any questions any of you have at the conclusion of the program. Thank you.
Around the world travel to commemorate the anniversary in Runnymede today, including a delegation of American lawyers who view the Magna Carta as a foundation of the US Constitution. William Hubbard, president of the American Bar Association, spoke about the Charter's significance.
Control over their destiny, and they were not subject to the unfettered discretion of the sovereign.
And does it worry you when you think of, the way, I'm going back to things like habeas corpus or the holding on to people without trial.
Made possible the United States Constitution. But while some things have changed, the overarching message remains constant. Magna Carta has advanced important human rights through centuries and throughout democracies all around the world.
I'm pleased to say William has joined us now. Welcome, thanks for coming in. You gave the speech and you've really sort of demonstrated that link that the US feels to the Magna Carta, your own constitution.
It's a powerful link. The American Bar Association has always been interested in reaffirming the importance of Magna Carta. It was in 1957 that 9,000 lawyers in the U.S. gave the money to erect a monument at Runnymede to memorialize Magna Carta. And we've raised some additional funds, and we've come back and we've refurbished it. But the most important thing is that we're here to make the public aware of the importance of Magna Carta, certainly in the U.S. and around the world. It is the foundation of America's constitutional democracy.
Give us a sense of just what the US Constitution means to an American, because we don't always understand that.
Well, it's the most revered, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and the Bill and the subsequent Bill of Rights are the most iconic documents in American history, but you trace the words in those documents directly back to Magna Carta, the concepts of due process of law, trial by jury. When the colonists arrived from England, they brought with them the concepts of freedom and rights as Englishmen, and they made manifest those principles in the state constitutions, and that later became our U.S. Constitution.
So we gave you the Magna Carta and you decided you didn't want to have anything more to do with it. And does it seem to you odd that the UK doesn't really have a constitution? Is that something that seems unfathomable?
It is a little curious to an American because we parse those words. Anytime we have a case or a law or a public discussion, we're always talking about the Constitution of the United States and what it means.
Yeah, it's true, isn't it? I mean, it's something that every school kid knows off by heart, all the limits. So when you look back at the Magna Carta, what do you think the sort of, if you could single out the most fundamental clause?
The most fundamental principle from Magna Carta is that no one is above the law.
No.
Thomas Paine said right before the Revolution, in America, law is king. And so was the idea that the people had some control over their destiny, and they were not subject to the unfettered discretion of the sovereign.
And does it worry you when you think of, the way, I'm going back to things like habeas corpus or the holding on to people without trial. If you compare Guantanamo, what's happened under sort of administrations with what the message of the Magna Carta says then, do you have problems reconciling that?
Well, there are always challenges. There are always disputes about what the Constitution means, what those rights and what due process of law means, what being detained means without access to habeas corpus. And it's the application to the specific facts that lawyers argue about, and judges have to decide where those boundaries are.
It's great to have you here. Thank you very much for coming, William Hubbard.
Thank you all.
Truly a fascinating program, William. Thank you for being here. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule. We have a small token of our appreciation. Okay, let me call on President-elect John Bakis to tell us what's coming up.
Good afternoon. Next week, we have our member and esteemed Lieutenant Governor Henry McMaster will talk to us, and I think you will enjoy what he has to say next week.
Look forward to that. Bring your guests next week, and if you'd all stand, we'll close by singing.